So, it's been a year since Warlord Games announced that they were releasing a new set of miniatures for a new game. While, yeah, it's true, it's basically black powder, I was really quite excited. So as I sit here preparing the demo kit that they released for the game, I thought I'd give my 2 dice worth on what I think of it. This is just my general thoughts on the game. If you've already got the game, then I hope that what I'm about to share is worth discussing. If you've already decided that you will not be getting into Epic Battle Waterloo, I hope that you'll use this video as company while you paint. Now, those of a certain vintage, or the grognards, who have been playing Napoleonics using different scales, well, they're unlikely to start a whole new scale so late in their gaming lives. So if you're one of these and you're listening, thank you so much. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand that this new product is not for everyone. Some gamers of a certain vintage already have invested small fortunes and will not be so interested in a new scale. Right, so let's talk about scales first. The Big Battles Epic Waterloo set introduces a whole new scale for the Napoleonic enthusiasts. These new miniatures are at 13mm or 13.5mm, which would make this Warlord Games' own scale. Now, this is not unusual. Backers has their 6mm and AB figures have their 18mm. There are a few common scales when it comes to Napoleonics. The very popular 15mm, the 20mm scale, the 10mm scale, 6mm, the backers was one. AB figures is 18mm scale and the 28mm scale. Honestly, that's a lot of scales. Now, I've had the privilege of handling almost all of the scales available, and I can easily say that each scale has its own merit. The backers 6mm, for example, will give you the scope and the grandeur of a mass battle, but it does sacrifice the detail on the figures. These figures look great from afar, but not so up close. On the other end of the scale, 28mm miniatures offer all the pleasing detail the miniature painter needs. However, all the details will demand more time each figure. The last time I painted a Napoleonic battalion at 28mm, it took me a few months of painting. Now, when I realized that this would have to be multiplied by the amount of battalions I needed to paint for a corps, Waterloo started to feel like a lifetime away. Now, the 20mm scale also has its cheerleaders. In my experience, most of the folks who have 20mm Napoleonics are from a certain vintage. These are the boys who troll the Matchbox catalogs and bought inexpensive boxes of plastic Napoleonic goodness. These figures were cheap enough to buy stacks of for their collection. Now, only a handful of these collectors have actually painted all of their plastics. Many have unopened boxes in their storerooms waiting to see a coat of paint. Now, this unpainted swag is actually a problem for a lot of scales, but because of how cheap 20mm minis were and are, almost everyone I know of a certain vintage has at least a box of plastic 20mm figures in their storeroom. Which brings me to Warlord Games' 30mm, which I agree is a strange scale as it attempts to combine what 15mm, 20mm, and 6mm does well. Epic attempts to balance scope, detail, and cost. Scale lobbyists will always be scale lobbyist. Now, what's a scale lobbyist? Is a person who lobbies for his scale. But for me, at the game shop, it's easier to promise scale and reasonable detail at a reasonable cost to a customer. With a community that seems to be shrinking, many older players at my store lobby for new players to follow them and collect armies for the scales that these players have armies for. Like I said earlier, this is called scale lobbying. And it's more evident to me, the guy at the game shop, because I sit and I listen to these lobbyists convince new customers and debate with each other which is the better scale to play. Which is great for an evening of chat, but it can get quite tiresome when the same arguments come up over and over again. Now, honestly, I can understand the lobbying. Wargaming the Napoleonic period is a daunting task. If you intend to do a lot of Napoleonic gaming, you'd want to have almost all the nations represented. The average Napoleonic player will only have maybe one army in their collection. Those who have two armies in their collections are already setting themselves up for a mountain to climb. Now, unless you have very deep pockets and a lot of time to spend painting, well, Napoleonic gaming will remain a group event. It's better when there is a community who's willing to work together to build the different nations in order to play as many encounters as possible. Now, new players will have no problem joining a Napoleonic Wargames group. However, there will come a time when the new player would also like to collect an army of their own. Now, when a newbie or a new player joins an established group, the group would already have players with either French, English, Austrians, or Prussians. Sometimes, some of the more mainstay players have more than one army. In most cases, the main player typically has either French or English, which means the newbie will often be politely recommended to choose another nation to collect. Being the first few in the group would offer the newbie a chance to choose the Austrians or the Prussians, for example. Now, a group with a nice spread of each of these four nations would be able to play a large number of the conflicts in the Napoleonic War. The newbie, however, who joins much later may end up being convinced to end up collecting and playing the smaller nations, which he initially, did not even know existed. Now, this is where I usually see which gaming groups in my area are more newbie friendly and which are, they just want an extra body to collect a nation that was not popular. I like the fact that Big Battles covers one battle at a time. So the first battle they chose is the Battle of Waterloo. Now, at the time of this video, Epic still does not have any Austrians. So a whole host of important Napoleonic battles cannot be refought. Waterloo is the most famous and probably the one most recognizable to the newbie. I've actually had long drawn conversations with many of my customers at the game shop about how they think, Warlord should have chosen another battle to feature as their initial focus. Some have even gone to say that, Waterloo is just so mainstream. But what I do is I tell them at the end of their long evangelizing that for me, the newbies that I meet or the new customers that I meet have no idea what a Salamanca or Austerlitz is. So it just makes sense to choose something more popular. I mean, most of the customers that walk into my game shop want to try some Napoleonics. And you know what? Waterloo is great. Also, there's actually a movie. So I can actually, introduce them to a movie or the Waterloo movie for them to enjoy and get soaked in to the period. Keeping it at Waterloo is great. It's slightly easier to find information on Waterloo, and in this day and age, you have a lot of information on this particular famous battle. More access to information is priceless to the newbie. This actually makes the painting so much easier. I remember when I first started collecting Napoleonics, I had what I like to call painter's paralysis. I mean, I was so concerned about getting the things right. I was so concerned about getting the facings right, the colors right, that painting regiments was such a mental block. back when I first started, there was no internet for me to trawl for, color plates or order of battles. And when I decided to buy the photostated guides at the back of some of these wargame magazines, it actually confused me even more. Painting figures, especially Napoleonic figures, at any scale is a torture. Let me just say that. So regardless of which scale you choose, you're gonna be knuckled down in frustration. It's one of the more colorful conflicts, and that will hurt you when you paint Napoleonics in ways you've never felt before. Which brings me to why I'm actually sitting here assembling these sprues and not painting them first. And that's colored plastics. Now, growing up, I was actually very impressed that Gundam kits came with colored plastics. So you only had to paint this Gundam kits only if you wanted to. They were good to go out of the box and they were colorful. So when they announced that Epic Battle plastics were going to be color coded, my gosh, I was extremely happy. As it stands, the English are red, the French are blue, and the Prussians are black. Now, all you had to do was just clip them off the sprue and almost immediately play with them. Now this is something never done to a Napoleonics tabletop game before. And I believe this will be the thing that gives Epic Battles the lift it will need above all the other scales. Now it will take me a night to clip and blue tag these figures to their bases, and 24 hours after I've received them, they are ready for demos. And for me, if I can get the demos going, then I can get the players in. Now, buy yourself a starter, and over an evening and a hot bovril, they'll be ready in a few hours. The Epic Battles Napoleonic could be the gateway the Napoleonic Wars tabletop needs. It will bring in new blood to the hobby. Yeah, it's true that it's missing the big part of the hobby, which is basically, some people say, the point of the hobby, which basically means you're not painting them immediately, or you're not spending time painting them. But to be honest, you can't argue with the clip and play method. Now, once they've got a few games under their belt, I'm sure if the interest is there, slowly these figures will get a coat of paint. It's great that you get to try these figures out almost immediately, honestly. It requires very little startup time. Now, once the newbies have had a good chance to move around Napoleonic formations and move around figures across the board with minimal effort or with a simple rule set, it's easier to introduce new rules to play with using these figures. In fact, from here, with these figures, the world of the Napoleonic rule sets opens up to them. A quick look on YouTube and you can already see these figures being adapted for Shako. I've heard that some folks don't really like the Black Powder rule set, and I can understand that. The Black Powder rules honestly does not endear itself to the gamer of a certain vintage. Many saying it does not have all the subtleties of a proper Napoleonic rule set, which I can somewhat agree with. But consider this, to the newbie, it's something for them to get their heads around playing. It's a huge change from las cannon to muskets. And it's also a simple enough rule set to teach and learn quickly. It's easier to grasp, more or less. And as I said before, give the newbie a chance to play with these figures and then later introduce them to something new. All I'm saying is, take a look at the opportunities that Epic Battles Waterloo has and give the set a chance. Now, this will be the game where you can bring thousands and thousands of figures to your local gaming club and not break your back. Now, just to be very, very clear, Warlord Games has not paid me anything or in any way induced me to do this review. It's basically done out of just observations and the fact that I like the game and just want to talk about it. Hopefully when I get a few demos going, I'll come back and talk about some of the rules, or maybe how I felt about playing Epic Battles. Until then, this is just my 2 dice worth.